They thought it was funny. At a grand family dinner, while everyone else took their places at beautifully decorated tables, I was told I didn't deserve a spot with the adults. Instead, they pointed me toward the kids' table, plastic chairs, bright cartoon cups, and mocking laughter surrounding me. I swallowed my pride, sitting there while whispers spread about how I had failed in life. What none of them knew was that the very place they mocked me in, the restaurant where we sat, was mine. And soon, the truth would be served. The evening began with a shimmer of glass and the low hum of chatter, the kind of polished noise that fills a high-end restaurant when families gather in numbers. Golden chandeliers cast a warm glow over the velvet-lined booths and pristine white tablecloths, each table carefully arranged with polished silverware that reflected the light like tiny stars. My family had decided to host a dinner here, a show of wealth and status, something they thrived on. I walked in, dressed neatly, not flamboyantly, but carefully chosen to look presentable. Yet, from the moment I stepped through the grand entrance, I could feel the weight of eyes on me, measuring me, whispering, already placing me in a category I knew too well. "Look who finally showed up," my cousin drawled, sipping from a tall glass of sparkling water, his smirk sharp enough to cut. "I thought he wouldn't come," an aunt chimed in, her voice sweet with fake surprise but dipped in venom. "Busy with whatever it is he does these days." The laughter that followed was light, but it clung to me like static. I gave a polite nod, biting back a response. Over the years, I had grown used to these subtle digs. Every gathering turned into a reminder of where I supposedly fell short. Never quite as successful, never quite as worthy, never the golden child who was celebrated. The long dining table stretched across the hall, filled with place cards marking each seat. My eyes scanned for my name. My parents sat near the head, surrounded by relatives who carried themselves with the arrogance of achievement. Chairs pulled back with confident ease as everyone found their spot, murmuring greetings and adjusting their jackets. Then came the moment I noticed it. My name wasn't anywhere among them. "Ah, you'll be over there," my uncle announced, his hand gesturing toward the far corner of the room. I followed his finger, my gaze landing on a much smaller table. Brightly colored plastic cups were set beside the china, and tiny chairs circled the table like a daycare setup. Cartoon-themed napkins peeked from under neatly folded menus. Children were already seated there, legs swinging freely, giggling with pure innocence. It was the kids' table. A ripple of laughter ran through the adults, subtle for some, not so much for others. "It's fitting, don't you think?" another cousin muttered, loud enough for me to hear. "He's always been the odd one out." Heat flushed my face, not from anger, but from the humiliation that burned at my core. I forced a weak smile, though my hands trembled slightly as I made my way toward the corner. The children looked up at me with wide eyes, puzzled but welcoming. One little girl scooted over and offered me a seat with genuine kindness, the only kindness I'd felt since I walked in. Behind me, I could hear them. The snickers, the half-whispered jokes, the casual cruelty. "Maybe he'll fit in better there," someone said. "At least he won't bring down the grown-ups' conversation." I lowered myself into the too small chair, knees bent awkwardly, shoulders hunched to fit the tiny space. The kids giggled, not at me but at the absurdity of an adult squeezed into their world. I smiled faintly at them, grateful for their innocence, but the sting of mockery from the other table pressed down heavier than the chandelier light. From where I sat, I could see the adults raising their glasses, exchanging toasts, leaning in with the ease of people who felt entitled to the spotlight. And here I was, tucked away, reduced to a punchline in their story. I clenched my jaw, swallowing the bitterness that rose in my throat. They thought they had put me in my place, but little did they know, this restaurant wasn't theirs to claim. The irony, though still unspoken, sat quietly with me, waiting for its moment to arrive. The laughter from the main table drifted over like an old, familiar storm cloud, heavy with the same patterns I had known my whole life. It wasn't just this night, it had always been this way. My family had a gift for turning every gathering into a stage where my shortcomings became the entertainment. They never missed the chance to remind me of the gap between their expectations and my reality, or rather, what they believed my reality to be. Sitting at that children's table, I couldn't help but feel the echoes of years past pressing in on me, replaying like a cruel highlight reel. I remembered being 17, eager to share my acceptance letter to a university program I had worked so hard for. While most kids my age celebrated with their families, mine had raised an eyebrow. That school, my father's brother scoffed. It's hardly Ivy League. Not impressive at all. Your cousin Daniel already has offers from 2 better universities. And just like that, my moment was dismissed, swallowed by comparisons. The same thing happened when I pursued my own passions. I didn't want to follow the neat little paths they laid out for me. Doctor, lawyer, engineer, the professions that came with bragging rights at dinner parties. I had dared to chase something different, something uncertain. And to them, that was nothing but proof of my foolishness. Now, years later, sitting among giggling children, their voices filled with playful chatter, I could hear the same old refrains playing out at the adults' table. So, still chasing that, what do you call it? Your little project. My aunt's voice rang out with mocking curiosity. She said, project, the way someone might say, imaginary friend. Oh, don't be harsh, another uncle chimed in, grinning. He's probably working on his next big failure. That's what, number 3 now. His words were greeted with chuckles, clinking glasses, the casual cruelty passed around as though it were dessert. My cousin leaned back in his chair, his voice dripping with smugness. I guess some people just don't have the drive. I mean, look at me, promotion last month, new car, new house. Hard work pays off, doesn't it? He tilted his glass toward me as if offering a toast in my honor, though everyone knew it was a jab. The words stabbed deeper than I wanted to admit, but I had learned long ago how to keep my face unreadable. I laughed softly, a hollow sound that disguised the sting. They thought I was used to it, that I didn't care anymore, but each remark added another stone to the pile I had been carrying since childhood. As the conversation circled the table, their voices grew louder, bolder, feeding off each other's cruelty. At least he's consistent, one cousin joked. He consistently proves us right. No matter what he does, it never goes anywhere. The adults roared with laughter, raising their glasses again, the sound echoing through the restaurant like a cruel chorus. I sat still, listening, breathing slowly. I felt the sharp edge of humiliation pressing down on me, but underneath it was something else, something steady, quiet, waiting. They didn't know. They couldn't see past the version of me they had created in their minds years ago. To them, I would always be the one who didn't measure up, the one stuck at the kids' table, forever small in their eyes. But as they laughed, I let my gaze wander around the restaurant, the staff moving smoothly, the polished service, the perfection of every detail I had poured myself into. Every inch of this place carried a piece of me, though they were too blind to recognize it. They were mocking me inside my own walls, tearing me down in the very space that was built by the work they said I was incapable of. The irony swelled inside me, a secret I held close, one that warmed me even as their words cut deep. For once, I didn't feel the urge to fight back or defend myself. I knew the night wasn't over, and when the moment came, their laughter would taste bitter on their tongues. The chair beneath me wobbled slightly as I shifted, my knees jutting awkwardly under the tiny table. It was meant for children no older than 10, their legs swinging freely, feet nowhere near the ground. Mine, on the other hand, were folded and cramped, the sharp edge of the chair biting into my thighs. The kids around me eyed me curiously, their chatter momentarily pausing before resuming in a chorus of innocent giggles. To them, my presence was funny, not cruel. One boy grinned wide and asked, "Are you too big for this table?" His tone wasn't mocking, just curious, the way only a child could be. I managed a small smile. Maybe a little, I admitted, forcing a lightness into my voice that I didn't feel. Another girl leaned over, her pigtails swaying as she studied me with exaggerated seriousness. Why aren't you with the grown-ups? She asked, her head tilting like she genuinely wanted to solve the mystery. I swallowed hard, the question landing heavier than it should have. Before I could form an answer, laughter trickled from the adults' table. I didn't need to look to know they were watching me, finding joy in the sight of me squeezed into a child's chair, my shoulders hunched and my dignity forced down a size. Their grins weren't subtle, smug, sharp, brimming with the satisfaction of seeing me diminished. I picked up one of the brightly colored cups, its surface plastered with cartoon animals, and raised it to my lips. The juice inside tasted sweet, almost cloying, and for a moment I hated that it reminded me of my place here, something childish, unserious, unworthy of the fine glasses of wine clinking just a few feet away. Do you have kids? The boy asked suddenly, his wide eyes searching mine. I shook my head gently. No, not yet. Oh, he said, nodding as if that explained everything. Then you can be like a big brother here. The simplicity of his logic almost made me laugh, but my chest was too tight to let the sound out. I could feel the adults' eyes burning holes in my back, their whispered remarks reaching me even over the children's chatter. Every so often, one of them would glance over, shake their head, and smirk as if they had proven their point, that I didn't belong, that I was perpetually stuck beneath them. I stared down at my plate, the food suddenly tasteless. Inside, my thoughts churned with memories of every moment they'd made me feel small, every time my dreams had been dismissed, every time I had been reduced to the punchline of their joke. Sitting here, at this miniature table, surrounded by innocent faces, it felt like all those years had condensed into one cruelly orchestrated image. The children tugged at my sleeve now and then, asking silly questions, showing me toys they'd brought along, and for them, I managed soft answers and faint smiles. But beneath it all, humiliation coursed through me, tightening its grip. It wasn't just the chair that didn't fit, it was the role they had forced me into. And though I stayed silent, I promised myself one thing: this moment, this image of me brought so low, would not be how the evening ended. As I sat there, shifting uncomfortably in the small chair that seemed almost designed to mock me, my mind drifted, not to the present laughter echoing from the adults' table, but to the long road that had led me here. It hadn't been easy. In truth, the version of me they still mocked was a version I had already buried, one who had stumbled so many times that even I had once believed their words might be true. I remembered my first attempt at building something of my own. I had poured everything into a small cafe, renting a cramped space with barely enough left to furnish it. I worked behind the counter myself, making coffee, cleaning tables, hoping that passion alone could keep the dream alive. But passion didn't pay the rent, and when the customers didn't come, the landlord's notice arrived instead. I packed up what little I had left, ashamed to tell my family. When they found out, though, the disappointment in their eyes wasn't silent. They laughed, cloaking it in pity, muttering things like, "We told him it wouldn't work." The second attempt wasn't much better. I had scraped together savings, partnered with someone I thought I could trust, and tried again, this time with a small eatery that never made it past its first year. My partner bailed, debts piled up, and once again I stood on the sidewalk watching a dream crumble into locked doors and silence. The weight of failure was crushing, and nights blurred together as I stared at ceilings in cheap apartments, wondering if maybe they were right, that I wasn't cut out for success, that my place really was small, forgettable. But somewhere between those sleepless nights, something hardened inside me. I realized that failure wasn't the end unless I let it be. Each misstep taught me something the last one hadn't: how to read contracts more carefully, how to balance costs, how to listen to what people wanted rather than what I assumed they did. And slowly, I began to understand that my mistakes weren't proof of weakness, but bricks in a foundation I hadn't finished building. So I worked harder. I gave up comfort, choosing late nights over sleep, study over leisure. I pored over business manuals, sat through seminars, asked questions that bruised my pride but sharpened my mind. There were nights when I couldn't afford proper meals, but I fed myself on the thought that one day, this effort would matter. My hands ached, my eyes burned, but the fire inside me refused to go out. Eventually, cracks of light began to show. My ideas grew sharper, my choices wiser. Small opportunities turned into stepping stones, and slowly, painfully, I climbed. Each lesson from the past became a tool in my hand, each failure a reminder that I could endure more than I thought. The scars of those struggles were still with me, invisible yet heavy, but they also fueled me. Now, sitting at the kids' table, their laughter ringing in my ears, I realized how far I'd come. They still saw me as the person who had fallen, not the one who had stood back up. And I didn't mind letting them laugh a little longer. After all, the sweetest part of building something strong is knowing that those who doubted you will never see it coming, until it's too late. The hum of conversation continued around me, but beneath it all, I could sense a quiet current in the room, one only I seemed to notice. My family laughed, clinked glasses, and traded stories about their accomplishments, each tale louder and more embellished than the last, but I sat still, observing. I didn't need to brag, didn't need to match their noise. My story wasn't one I had ever told them, and perhaps that's why they still believed I was beneath them. I had chosen silence, chosen not to flaunt what I had built, because wealth, to me, was not meant to be a weapon. It was ironic, really. They mocked me for failing in this very space, blind to the truth that every detail they enjoyed, the glimmering chandeliers, the perfectly folded napkins, the seamless service, existed because I had willed it into being. This restaurant was not just a business, it was a monument to every sleepless night, every lesson paid for in sweat and sacrifice. Yet they sat there, treating it as though it were theirs to look down on, never suspecting that the walls held my story within them. The staff, though, they knew. I caught the way the maitre d' gave me a small nod when I walked in, not the casual acknowledgement given to any guest, but one of quiet respect. The waiter who served our table placed my plate down with a certain care, his eyes flicking to mine for a moment longer than necessary, as if to silently say, "We know who you are, sir." Another server, passing by with a tray of drinks, offered me a brief smile, one that held more warmth than the polite masks they wore for everyone else. Of course, my family didn't notice. They were too busy with themselves, too blind to the subtleties around them. If they saw the deference in the staff's eyes, they must have assumed it was standard hospitality. But I knew better. These were my people, my team, the very lifeblood of the place I had built. Their respect wasn't forced, it was earned, grown out of the long nights we had spent together making sure this restaurant stood out from all the rest. Still, I kept my mask in place. I sipped from my cartoon cup at the kids' table, letting them laugh, letting them believe. What they didn't understand was that silence was its own kind of power. I didn't need to throw my success in their faces to prove anything. My existence here, my ability to sit calmly under their insults while the staff around them quietly acknowledged me as something more, was proof enough. There was a certain satisfaction in holding the truth so close, knowing they were playing a game whose rules had already shifted. They thought they were keeping me in my place, when in reality, I was the one who had placed them in mine. All I had to do was wait. The moment was coming, carried in the footsteps of the very waiters they dismissed without a second glance. The truth would arrive not with my voice, but with theirs. And when it did, the laughter at the adults' table would turn into silence heavy enough to drown them. The clatter of silverware and the rise and fall of laughter filled the dining hall, but beneath it, I heard the measured footsteps approaching. The waiter moved with practiced grace, weaving between tables until he reached mine. He leaned slightly, lowering his voice but not enough to go unheard. "Sir," he said, with a note of respect that cut through the noise, "would you like us to prepare the private dining area now, or shall we keep the main floor as is?" The words froze the air. Forks slipped against porcelain, the sharp clink ringing louder than the chatter that had filled the room moments before. Heads turned. My uncle's hand hovered midair with his glass, his smirk faltering as though someone had pulled it off his face. I looked up calmly, meeting the waiter's gaze. "Keep the main floor," I replied evenly, my voice carrying across the space. "My family seems comfortable here." That single word, my, hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. A murmur rippled through the table, confusion and disbelief scrambling to catch up with what they had just heard. The waiter, unshaken, gave a small bow. As you wish. If you need anything else, mister. He paused, then spoke my name clearly, respectfully, like a title. Your restaurant, sir, is running smoothly tonight. Silence. Not the comfortable kind that settles after a meal, but the stunned, suffocating silence that follows a revelation too large to immediately process. My aunt's hand trembled slightly as she set her glass down. My cousin, who had spent the night bragging about promotions and cars, stared at me as if I had spoken in a foreign tongue. I didn't need to explain. The truth had landed with perfect precision. Their laughter, their mockery, their smug satisfaction, it all crumbled in an instant, leaving only the raw, unpolished shock on their faces. I leaned back in the too small chair, still seated at the kids' table, a faint smile tugging at the corner of my lips. Let them stew in it. Let them sit with the knowledge that the man they had pushed aside, diminished, and ridiculed had been the one holding the foundation of their evening all along. For once, I didn't feel small in that chair. I had never felt taller. The silence stretched so long it almost became comical. For a family that prided itself on never running out of things to say, they suddenly had no words. Wide eyes darted between me and the waiter, searching desperately for some loophole, some explanation that would make this revelation less humiliating. My uncle, always the first to laugh at my expense, opened his mouth as if to speak, but only a weak sound escaped before he closed it again, his face pale and blotchy. My cousin, the one who had raised his glass to toast his own promotion, leaned back in his chair as though the weight of the truth had shoved him there. His smirk had vanished, replaced by a look that was equal parts disbelief and shame. He tried to muster a laugh, but it caught in his throat, breaking off into silence. The sound of forks against plates had stopped entirely. No one dared continue eating, as though chewing would somehow admit their ignorance more loudly than words ever could. My aunt, the one who had asked about my little project, plastered on a brittle smile. Well, isn't that something?" she stammered, her voice too bright, her eyes avoiding mine. "You should have told us. We would have been so proud." The lie was transparent, her desperation naked. Pride was the last thing she had ever felt for me. Across the room, the children at my table erupted into giggles. They didn't fully grasp what had happened, but they knew enough to recognize that the joke had flipped. Their innocent laughter, high-pitched and pure, cut through the heavy silence, making the moment sweeter than any vindictive speech could have. One little boy leaned toward me and whispered loudly enough for the others to hear, "Does that mean this whole place is yours?" When I nodded, their eyes lit up with delight, and their laughter grew louder, free of malice, untainted by envy. The adults shifted in their seats, shame settling in like an unwelcome guest. A few muttered half-hearted apologies, awkwardly fumbling with napkins and glasses to avoid my gaze. Others stayed utterly silent, their earlier arrogance dissolving into something small, something fragile. The power they had wielded with their laughter just an hour earlier had slipped from their hands and landed squarely in mine. And in that moment, seated at the kids' table, I felt no need to gloat. Their stunned faces, their hollow smiles, their silence, it was victory enough. I let the moment breathe, refusing to rush into it the way they always had with their taunts. The silence at the adults' table was thick, almost suffocating, but I didn't fill it with gloating or bitterness. I simply sat back in my small chair, my hands folded loosely in my lap, and allowed their shame to settle on its own. For once, I wasn't the one scrambling to explain myself. They were. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady, calm, and quieter than they expected. "You've all spent years telling me what I wasn't. Not successful enough. Not strong enough. Not worthy enough. And I believed you for a while. But failure doesn't define a person, it teaches them. Every setback I faced brought me here. Not to prove you wrong, but to prove myself right." Their eyes stayed on me, some wide with guilt, others darting away in embarrassment. No one dared to interrupt. I reached for the brightly colored cup still sitting on the kids' table, lifted it gently, and smiled faintly. You thought this was my place, that I belonged here, beneath you. But worth isn't measured by where you sit, or what you wear, or how loudly you brag. It's measured by what you build when no one believes in you. The children beside me grinned, sensing something powerful even if they didn't fully understand it. Their laughter earlier had broken the tension, but now their curious eyes seemed to mirror the weight of my words. I took a sip, set the cup down, and leaned back, content. I didn't need their validation anymore. The truth was out in the open, undeniable. Their mockery had collapsed under its own weight, and I had no desire to add to their humiliation. Dinner continued, though the air was different now, humbled, subdued. They ate quietly, each of them lost in thought, their earlier arrogance stripped away. I, on the other hand, dined with a peace I hadn't felt in years. Calm, composed, and dignified, I let the evening close on my terms, knowing that for the first time in a long time, I was no longer the family's punchline. That night, I didn't just reclaim my seat at the table, I reclaimed my dignity. They laughed when they thought I was beneath them, but life has a way of revealing truths at the right time. Success doesn't need to be shouted, it only needs the right moment to shine. And as I left my own restaurant, walking past stunned faces, I carried a simple lesson with me. Sometimes the sweetest victories are served not with anger, but with silence and grace.